All right, so I think we're about ready to go. It's 1 o'clock. We've got some folks joining on. Want to welcome everyone to this afternoon session. We've got a great lineup today of folks talking about LGBTQ inclusivity. We know that sport can be a powerful catalyst for positive development, from physical health to mental health to social and emotional well-being. At the same time, however, programming and practices that are not inclusive can prove harmful. In this session, we'll be talking to 3 panelists about their experiences and recommendation working in sports or sports-based youth development for LGBT inclusivity. The panelists also want to make clear that they'll be speaking to and representing their own experiences and identities, and they're not doing so for the broader LGBTQ community. So with that, I want to take this opportunity to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. And Danya, why don't we start with you?
Great. Well, I'm excited to be here. So thank you all for tuning in. My name is Danya Rosen. I use she or they pronouns. I'm the executive director of an organization called Chicago Run, which I'll speak to a little later. Previously, I was the ED at a health equity organization, and I've been in the nonprofit and advocacy sectors for the past 15 years, both in direct service, but also on the electoral and campaign side. And just a quick fun fact about me, I'm a runner, I'm a rock climber, love sports and fitness of all kinds.
Great. Ashley?
Thank you, Mr. Davis. My name is Ashley Young. So I'm currently a university student, a very old university student. I was retired as a U.S. Air Force intelligence personnel after 2 tours to Afghanistan. I got hurt over there. Since then, I started going to college for urban studies and geospatial analytics. And right now I'm minoring in business sports management. And I also play women's semi-pro football. I did somewhat almost heal from all my injuries. You can see my helmet, my jersey. So I just wanted to make it clear that we play football too.
Great. Will?
Sure, thanks, Marty. My name is Will McEnany, and I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm representing the Susan Crown Exchange, which is a foundation here in Chicago whose mission is to prepare youth to thrive in a rapidly changing world. So yeah, dialing in from Chicago, where as of this morning, we have our official first snow of the year, which feels very early to someone who grew up in California. And on the professional side, SCE is here because we just launched a program area in youth sports, recognizing the capacity that youth sports have to promote key social and emotional skills and positive youth development. Personally, I grew up as an LGBT athlete. I played soccer. I continue to play soccer in an LGBT league here in Chicago, and I'm an avid runner as well.
Great. So everyone here on the conference call, we're going to have a series of questions that the panelists will field, and then we will open it up for your questions and answers. And if I may take one quick moment, and I just want to say, Ashley, we greatly appreciate your service and your time. I'm the father of a U.S. Marine, so it runs deep, and I thank you very much. So to begin with, we'd like for each of you to just tell us what the LGBTQ community means to you. And Ashley, why don't you start?
Sure. So I didn't ask the panelist ages, but I'll be 35 here pretty soon. When I was growing up, I wouldn't say necessarily in my youth that there was a community that I could connect with, because we were right on the verge of having MySpace. This was before Facebook, so social media was really just becoming a new thing. And when I grew up, I didn't even know, to be honest with you, that I was anything other than straight. So that took some of my own figuring out. We talk about from my own personal experience. My mom said she knew when I was 11. I didn't know till I was 17. So as far as getting into a community, I really hadn't. That didn't come till later in life, when I was old enough to go out to the bars, and I realized that I wasn't so much welcomed at some bars more than others. And sports is something, again, that has transcended my whole life. So I started playing competitively basketball in the 3rd grade. So one thing that has never changed for me is when I step onto a court or step onto a field, that community is vastly different, I would say, in its own unique perspective, just like our community. But I would say that the two transcend, and we definitely have, I would say for women's football, we have a large percentage of the LGBT community involved with us.
Terrific. Danya, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Marty. So I think what I'll say here, and as I think a lot about community, one thing that feels important to share is I think about the LGBTQ community as communities. I think if I had to maybe debunk one myth, it's that we all are a monolithic community and we all share the same experiences and identities. I'll point out, and even as we were prepping for this panel, all of us on the panel were mindful of the fact that we are all cisgender white folks, and our experiences are very different from the identities and experience other queer, trans, and non-binary folks who hold different identities or hold intersections of different identities might face. And even within the community itself, there's still a lot of transphobia, biphobia, there's still systemic racism, there's still a lot of challenges even within the community. So I think it's important to think about us as communities. Again, many different people with different life experiences and different levels of privilege. And then on the flip side of that too, just a lot of family and joy. A lot of folks have what's called a chosen family, particularly for people who identify as LGBTQ and have family or home situations where folks were not accepting. People have built their own families and their own communities. It's a concept called chosen family. And so I also think about the communities as being a place for family and for kinship and for a lot of happiness.
Excellent. Will.
Thank you. Danya, I think what you say about both chosen family and communities within this greater community is so important. I think about this in both literal terms and personal terms. In literal terms, I think the LGBTQ plus community encompasses a wide range of people whose identities around biological sex, gender identity, and/or sexual orientation are different from what society has chosen to be the norm. And I use that word chosen pretty intentionally. But personally, for me, my community is exactly what you said, Danya. It's a chosen family of people who can empathize with a wide range of experiences and fears and triumphs and joys that I have that other people in my life cannot empathize with on the same level. So really thinking about it in a couple of different ways. And Danya said it, Marty, you said it, but it bears repeating. You know, I am not an expert on many of the other wide ranges of identities that are in this greater group of people. What I am an expert on is my story. And that's kind of the perspective that I'm going to be bringing to this panel.
Great. So, Will, why don't we continue on with you? We're going to talk to each of you to get a chance to answer this question, but can you talk a little bit about why you're passionate about sports and sports programming, and tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the work, both as an athlete formerly and then now as a sports programmer?
Sure. So I, again, have kind of a personal answer and a professional answer. SCE, the Susan Crown Exchange, where I work, came to this issue area through the perspective of social and emotional learning. There are, last year, I think 32.5 million kids played some form of organized youth sports. And within that, you know, it's one of the greatest out of school time activities that kids participate in across the country. And there's this huge potential for leveraging that time to promote the social and emotional skills that many of us learn from playing sports, whether it's how to be a good competitor, how to be a good sport, how to manage both failure and success, how to work with other people, people who may be really different from us. And I think, you know, we just launched this program area a couple of weeks ago, and it's led me to reflect on my own personal experiences growing up playing sports, where, you know, I was an LGBT athlete, both in high school as a young person and an adult. And I learned I wasn't the best athlete. I was never on varsity. I was a fairly mediocre soccer player. And I think I learned both how to push myself to do more than I thought I was capable of, and to recognize that, you know, I wasn't going to be the best ever, but to manage both my own failures and that of my team and use them to grow stronger. So I think that those are two life lessons that I've really kept with me, even though I might not have realized I was learning them at the time.
Well, I think a lot of us can empathize with your sports experience. Danya, how about you?
That resonates as well. So I have a somewhat unique experience. Both of my parents are 4th degree black belts in Taekwondo. So I grew up watching them do pretty amazing things. I remember as a small child watching my mom do a flying side kick to break a board over people lying on the ground. And that helped form my experience of what female identified folks are capable of and can do. And that was pretty amazing. So I've grown up playing all the sports. Similarly, was very mediocre, a mediocre soccer player, but I enjoyed playing, and I loved it, and it can be such a transformative experience. And so I've always been passionate about health and about sport. And I think from an organizational perspective as well, Chicago Run was such a nice alignment of my passion for sport and fitness, but supporting young people and having equitable access, particularly folks who have not had equal access to sport and to recreation. And I'll also say, so beyond playing sports and besides working in the sports-based youth development field, I also love watching sports and women's sports in particular. So I'll do a quick WNBA shout out. I think we need more visibility, more recognition for women's sports, and I could geek out about this for a long time.
How about you? Ashley, how about you?
So I just want to say shout out to, you know, Seattle Storm, obviously bringing home the hardware again. Thank you, Seabird, everybody. So yeah, I grew up, I got my start really in basketball. So that's where I started. I, you know, grew up on the border of Washington and Oregon. So down there, Prairie High School, I don't know if anybody's going to remember it, but during the 1990s, they dominated the what was it, the 4A championship. I don't know how many years back to back. We actually had 3 girls in my age group that went into playing the WNBA that I grew up playing with, which is pretty cool. So I got to, they really started all of their elementary schools from a young age, started, you know, grooming us to play in the system that we'd be playing in high school. So from the get-go, it has been AAU, you know, overly competitive basketball for me my whole life. And this is before we had the WNBA. So I remember that when the WNBA was formed. So I grew up, you know, playing with a, you know, it's a 29 and a half size ball for men and 28 and a half size ball for women. So I grew up playing with the boys basketball. And I remember, it's funny, before the start, Mr. Davis said that he went to college with a very unknown athlete named Michael Jordan. And I remember, you know, after school, my mom can attest to this, that I would be by myself for hours, you know, just doing free throws. And I said to myself in 3rd grade that I was gonna be the first woman in the NBA and that I was gonna be Michael Jordan's teammate. So that's what I said that I was going to be. So from a young age, I didn't know that there was such thing as this glass ceiling that people talk about. And I didn't know that there was also a difference in people. So I think one of my main messages during this, you know, convention is that we need to start normalizing things that maybe people find to be abnormal. And one of them for me is, obviously my sexuality has absolutely nothing to do with what I do on the court or on the field. So anyways, I moved back here to high school in the, I'm in the Tacoma area now. And when I went to the military, there was obviously a large break in my athletic career because, you know, we're doing PT out there, we're doing, you know, all kinds of wild, crazy stuff. So I didn't get a chance to play organized sports. And when I came home, I found out that women could play football. So this is something that I grew up not knowing that we could do. And that honestly So when you ask the question, what sports mean to me, sports really help habilitate myself back into society again. So I used it. Coming out of the military, you kind of partially lose your identity. That's one of the things with this network of people that I'm hoping to work with. When you lose your identity, either coming out of pro sports or coming out of the military, you got to find it again, find your passion again. So football helped me do that. I was able to start playing at 30. But so sports, I mean, honestly, just like Dania said, okay, women's U.S. national team soccer, is there really a better team than that? They're probably, you know, I love them. I follow them all over. I'm sad to see that a lot of our pro football, I mean, soccer players have gone overseas, but anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. So I hope that answers your question.
It does very well. Thank you. So Dania, I want to come back to you. You had talked about the importance of inclusivity with your organization, Chicago Run. Can you tell us more about Chicago Run and how you think about inclusivity from an organizational perspective?
Yeah. And first I want to say, I think sports, Will mentioned this when he talked about how many young people in particular engage in sports. Sports can be such a transformative space for all of these important benefits, not just physical, but mental and social, emotional. It can be a place to disrupt norms and for people to feel included. But if it's not done well or intentionally, it can also be a space that reinforces toxic masculinity or gendered violence or other harms, often unintentionally. According to, there's this organization, LGBTQ Sports Safe. And again, despite all the benefits that we know sport can have, of the youth athletes that they surveyed, they found that not only have 84% of all athletes experienced or witnessed homophobia in sports, 70% of the athletes actually said homophobia in sports was worse than in the general public. So I think it's really important, in order for sport to be this place that is transformative and safe, we have to do it well and we have to be inclusive. And LGBTQ young people, and in particular LGBTQ young people of color, experience higher health disparities. So it's incredibly important for us to do this work well. So Chicago Run, we're a nonprofit, and we use running and physical activity as a catalyst for not just physical health, but again, mental health and social emotional well-being. We have programming from pre-K through high school. And we focus on really promoting inclusivity, promoting trauma-informed practices. So being mindful of both the individual and the community trauma that many youth face, particularly right now, and building resilience to trauma and to anxiety. And again, I'll say here, I appreciate that you and Will caveated this earlier. I'm a queer person who runs an organization, but I am not an expert in LGBTQ inclusive practices outside of my own experience and what I'm trying to do at my organization. So I think about this and about cultural humility in a few different ways. I think it's important to create safe spaces for folks of any identity. I think it's important for programming to be inclusive. And that's not just for identity, but also ability levels. We know there's a steep decline in sports participation for the folks like Ashley. It sounds like you were a legit and talented athlete. I stopped playing in high school because after middle school, things got competitive. And because I was a mediocre athlete, I didn't have a chance to continue participating. So I think it's really important to continue creating spaces where, regardless of identity and ability level, that young people can continue engaging. I also think it's important to be mindful of language. So at Chicago Run, we use language of friends versus boys and girls. We don't separate young people by gender. Instead, we separate maybe by birthday or by counting down numbers, because sometimes gender-based practices can actually stigmatize or be unsafe for trans and non-binary individuals, right? So a lot of times it's just thinking about the ways in which we're implementing sport programming. And then the last thing I'll say here, and Will spoke to this as well, coaches. Having coaches and the adults who volunteer and participate in the program have identities and backgrounds that are similar to the communities with whom you're partnering is so important. to have visible role models and leaders. I didn't have a lot of queer, female, or non-binary like athletes or role models growing up. And so similar to Ashley's story, it was something I was confused about for a long time. So it's really important for people to have visible models of their identity.
Terrific. And just a real quick program note, I actually made a bit of a mistake, folks. I apologize. I sort of forced Danya into jamming two questions together. So we're going to adjust for that by, I'm going to turn Will to you next. And I want you to talk a little bit about why you think it's important for sports to be inclusive. But then I want you to go beyond that and talk about what role funders play in promoting safe, inclusive, and fun sports programming.
Sure, will do. So I wanted to answer this question with a story. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was, in my last year of playing soccer for high school because I wasn't on a path where I was going to be making varsity. So I was on the JV team, and during a practice, I believe, I don't even know what caused it, but one of my teammates called me a homophobic slur in front of the whole team. And I was not out at the time. I was definitely the only LGBTQ person on the team. So it was a very vulnerable and troubling space to be in. And my captain actually immediately stepped in, let that player know that this was not okay. And it just like neutralized the space in a way that immediately made me feel a lot safer. And this is pretty much the only strong memory I have from playing on that team. It was a very formative memory. And when I'm like reflecting on this, I think it speaks to this concept of inclusion a lot, as well as to the connection between inclusive spaces, social and emotional learning, and good coaches. We had a great coach who was the baseball coach, knew nothing about soccer, but it was in the off season. And even though he, didn't know all of the drills, and I think kind of stayed one practice ahead of the kids and like looked stuff up 5 minutes before we started, he did a great job in creating a space that was safe for all different kinds of athletes at a pretty diverse high school. And I think that, trickled down to the captain of the team and to the other teammates who backed the captain up when he stepped in on my behalf. So I think that just speaks to the importance of building these environments where everyone can thrive, and the role of both coaches and players in maintaining that space. But I also think that this word inclusion is an interesting one, because it's used alongside another word that's used a lot about the LGBT community, which is tolerance. And at the end of the day, I don't want to be tolerated. That is not a positive word for me. It is the bare minimum, which means I will not, it's kind of like, let's cut out the worst of the worst. If we have no homophobic slurs, if we do not vocalize violent acts against LGBTQ people, that is a space of tolerance. Inclusion then means everyone is invited to the table. Everyone has a seat at the table. Everyone is there. I want to be celebrated. I think that I've been in places where that's possible. I've now participated in 2 LGBTQ plus soccer leagues. I've won a championship in a straight soccer league as part of that LGBTQ team. I've seen people that are just really, really talented, both in my own community and with folks like Megan Rapinoe on the US women's soccer team, bringing home the biggest title in the world. And it's a space where, these athletes are not tolerated, they're not just included, but they are celebrated. And I think there's a strong connection between celebrating diversity in terms of sexuality and gender expression, and celebrating diversity in just what every player brings to the table. On my soccer team, we had really, really fast people who played the wings and in the midfield. We had strikers with the skill set needed to score goals. We had goalies with a completely different skill set. We had defenders who were playing completely different roles on the field. And this is true of a lot of different sports. And if we can celebrate the diversity in ability and skill set of our athletes, it seems like a very natural next step to celebrate who they are off of the field as well.
That's excellent. And now, Ashley, I'm going to turn to you and give you the same privilege to answer a couple questions. One about the importance for sports programs to be inclusive, but then talk a little bit about the challenges that you've seen LGBTQ identified athletes facing.
Sure. And yeah, I paused to give you a space to interrupt me because it's been a long time of people hearing my voice. I think.
Actually, I'm sorry. Did I say you, Will, or Ashley?
Oh, sorry. I didn't.
I apologize. I apologize. Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, I didn't mean to cut you off. Ashley, I actually directed those questions to you. Do you need me to repeat them, Ashley, or do you have it?
Yeah. Can I just get one question at a time, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one would be about the importance for sports programs to be inclusive.
So I think that the thing with sports is they should definitely be welcoming for every person. I think that in sports, you should be measured by, you know, if you're playing at a competitive level, you need to be measured at that level. You're competitive. You know, there really should be nothing about you besides the level that you compete at and what you can bring to the table on the field or the court. So in my personal opinion, should be irrelevant at the professional level. Even though lately there's been a lot of politics in sports, and we bring up Megan Rapinoe, these athletes are using their platform to speak up. So they're getting a voice that, you know, a lot of us in sports have not had that chance to speak up and say. As far as youth programs, the other two panelists have much more experience than I do personally at working with youth. I'm still in the competitive realm right now for women's football. Growing up, I can tell you a quick funny story. My mom, who's actually here, she's here to support me today, always dressed me in dresses and stuff. Say hi, Mom. Dressed me in dresses and stuff like that. And
hi, everyone. I've enjoyed this so much. I'm thrilled to be part of this, to see everything.
Yeah, she's very supportive. That's why she's here today. So anyways, she dressed me in dresses, and I came home one day and my mom told me, I was like, Mom, listen, I can't cross up the boys at recess because I got a dress on. This isn't going to work. It's getting in the way, and we got to change this. So, you know, as an Oshkosh, Bagosh and everything like that, we switched up because for me, when I was younger, they always put me, because of my competitive level, they put me with the boys because I was in there beating those guys up, you know, and they didn't like it. So they probably wanted me to get back on the other side, you know, cross them up, all that stuff, no look, reverse lay-in. I was getting them. But so when it comes to competitive, there's a different level between like community level when we talk about, say, the community of Tacoma, which I live in. And that is where we should definitely, you know, make sure it's inclusive and everything like that, and that everybody's taken care of, regardless of, you know, gender, sexuality, you know, what they look like or anything else, so that everybody should be included.
Okay, great. And then the second question are about the challenges that you've seen LGBTQ identified athletes face.
So this, I can speak for myself growing up. So I started facing some adversity around 7th grade. That's probably like I said, like I'm not, you know, I can share my story. I'm not afraid to admit it. I didn't know that I identify as lesbian, and I didn't know. I had no idea. I think I probably showed some signs that other people picked up on. So I started getting picked on by my own team, which was, you know, we started playing elementary together. You know, we grew up in middle school. We're about to go to high school together at a very competitive high school. So we were getting ready to do this, and the 3 middle schools were going to turn to 1 high school. Just stupid stuff like, you know, you shouldn't be sitting on the basketballs, right? Especially game balls. And well, I rolled one up and sat on one while we were talking one time, and a teammate came over, kicked it from underneath me. And I stood up, and, you know, stuff like that. Or, you know, girls, if you're not shaving your legs correctly. So it just gets into putting you in the stereotype that you have to be doing this, have to be doing that. And so I started getting in my face. I started facing adversity 7th and 8th grade, but the only thing that I could do was play harder. So as long as I whooped their butt in practice, there really wasn't a lot that they could say to me outside of school, because you need me. Game day, you're going to need me. It comes down to that last clutch shot, you need me. So unlike other people, my game spoke for itself. So I didn't necessarily face as much as diversity as other people. So I guess you could say that's a point of privilege just on the merit of my skill, but I did still face it. But the thing was a little bit different to me is that I kept fighting. I will never stop fighting. And that's one of the reasons why I'm on this panel, and to speak for many groups, not just LGBTQ, but for women and other things that we're facing today.
That's an outstanding answer, Ashley. Thank you very much. And that message about continuing to fight resonates on many, many levels. So finally, the last question for everyone here, and then we'll open it up to the audience to ask any questions they would like to ask. Can each of you talk a little bit about any sorts of resources they might turn to learn more about the issue in its broad strokes, or about the organizations that you're affiliated with on a more narrower scale, resources they may have there. So Danya, I'm gonna come back to you, and then we'll go to Will, and we'll go back to Ashley again.
Great, yeah. Well, so first, something that came up that I wanted to share over the course of this panel too, and I think Meg Rapinoe and Sue Bird are amazing and such a great power couple. I also want to shout out, I'm going to give another WMBA shout out, which has been at the forefront of a lot of social justice work, and highlight, I think a lot of us have heard of the Meg and the Sue, but I want to shout out other folks like Laisha Clarendon, who is, I think, the first non-binary professional athlete. They actually wrote a really great piece recently called Being Black and Non-Binary is My Superpower. And so I also want to elevate and to urge folks to continue learning about queer, trans, and non-binary athletes, but looking beyond some of the traditional names that pop into mind, because there's a lot of amazing athletes who are also, as I said, at the forefront of a lot of social justice work. So answering this in a few ways, would love for folks, if you're interested in learning more about Chicago Run, again, we provide inclusive running and physical activity programming to young people pre-K through high school of all identities. You can check out chicagorun.org or email me. In terms of just continuing to learn more, initially, when I was preparing for this question, I wanted to have a list of links and resources, and we can still send some follow-up. But what I'm going to urge folks to do also is take the time to do research, talk to more people, talk to people of different backgrounds and experiences. Oftentimes, the onus is on people who hold certain identities to be the ones to teach and to educate. And so as opposed to me or to us telling you all the answers, we'll also urge you, if this was a great first step, if you're just starting to think about how to be more inclusive in the way that you do sports or engage in sport programming. So please don't let this be the last conversation that you have. And yeah, I'll pause there.
All right, Will.
Cool, thanks, Danya. That was a great answer, and I appreciate just bringing more athletes that might not be known, but whose stories are just as valid and important into the conversation. I similarly was like, should I prepare like a big, Google Doc of like, facts and figures about LGBTQ participation in sports? And I decided not to go that route for similar reasons. But I think I would challenge folks on this call to continue their learning journey that began or continued with this panel by finding more stories directed, written, produced by queer creators, whether that's a book written by a queer author centering queer stories, movies with queer directors and actors.
Will, I think we lost audio for a second.
I think we may have lost Will. Ashley, why don't we jump to you, and we'll see if we can get Will back. If you could just talk a little bit about what people in the audience can do in terms of what resources that you would suggest to them to learn more about this topic.
I'm on the same boat as the rest of the panel. I kind of wanted today to develop organically. I would say what I would suggest for the audience to do is actually some self-evaluation. I think the best thing you can do is I mean, you can research all you want, but I think it's really taking a look within yourself and seeing how you possibly would approach some of these questions that have been asked today, and what your, you know, internal response would be, maybe as a hetero, you know, person. And so how have you treated in the past, maybe people that have been, you know, LGBTQ, how do you treat them now in your programs? There, you know, I can tell just based on the names in here, there's a lot of people that probably run organizations. So I would say that maybe an internal look for them would probably be the best thing, and to figure out, hey, am I being inclusive? Am I not? Like, what are, when I, you know, make a team, what am I cutting on? Or, you know, when I form a team and you need that good climate within your team, how am I going through that process? Either, you know, in the professional world, in business. I mean, this topic does not just relate to sports. That's my message. And normalizing, again, is my message. I actually see my college professor in here right now, which is kind of cool because I'm gonna hear him speak later. But so I'll have to give a shout out to University of Washington, which is where I'm studying right now, in the Urban Studies program, which does, you know, is learning about people. It's learning about more so the marginalized people in this world. So there's many groups of marginalized people. It's anybody that faces any type of discrimination, really, whether it be economic, education, access to food, or whatever. And we can put sports on that list, which is a small part. LGBTQ community. Let's see, I'm also gonna say, I would say just, you know, further your education in general. Education is really the key to everything, in my opinion. Until you really look at numbers, and I think that people need to understand the difference between numbers and percentages. That's super important. I'm also going to talk about, I should mention Rise Players Association, which is who I'm representing today. So basically what we want to do with Rise is help every athlete. It doesn't matter your background, but we want to help every athlete, and especially those that need it the most, that maybe are struggling. And those could be in our community of LGBTQ, if they're facing being picked on and stuff like that. So we want to basically, you know, identify, and you can research all you want, but identify and help people that are struggling. And so I guess that would be my message, is that if you cannot, so for example, for me, if I'm lesbian and I feel, this is my own personal thing, if I feel that I don't support the trans community, I'm being a hypocrite. So you cannot be hypocritical. You cannot pick and choose the issues that you support and the issues that you do not support. That's one of my things, is that you must support all people. Otherwise, you're being hypocritical. And I'd like for people to evaluate if they're practicing hypocrisy in their own lives.
That's a great way of thinking about it, Ashley. Thank you. Will, do we have you back? Yeah, I don't think we do. So what I'd like to do now is I want to open up the floor to the folks who joined us to hear these panelists talk about their experiences, and give them an opportunity to talk about or to raise any questions with the panelists that they would like to they'd like to raise. As moderator, I do want to kind of take advantage of the situation and raise the first question. As a coach myself, and as someone who works with athletes on a regular basis, but myself being more from a traditional orientation, I think a lot of people I work around are sensitive to the issues you're talking about, but I think a lot of us worry about saying the wrong thing. What would you say to people who may not be as educated but are sensitive and want to help, but worry about saying the wrong thing?
Yeah, I can chime in first if that's okay. And I've heard this question a lot. So I think what's key here is to focus more on learning and moving forward versus feeling apologetic. I think if you overly apologize, and the focus becomes more on yourself. So my best advice, and also understanding, a lot of people ask, what's the right term? The vernacular, even within the communities, is different, right? Everybody, there's a lot of different language, a lot of different terms. I would say, instead of focusing on getting it exactly right and then not doing anything, just do your best. If you make a mistake, acknowledge it and move forward. Because again, otherwise it's making it about you, and just commit to real and authentic learning.
Folks in the audience, any questions? We have about 20 minutes here, so we're not We're not pressed for time. We have a question from Holly. To Will's earlier point, what's the best way for sport organizations to be explicit and purposeful in their inclusivity in a way that's not simply tolerating?
I can feel this from the women's football perspective. So again, I don't know how, I'm not running an organization, so I'm a player. So I can only speak to that level, but you know, I just know on tryouts, you know, we are measured literally by our measurables. So, you know, doing the combine type drills and things like that. I would just say to someone looking to do that, be personal, not just tolerating. If you know, basically, if you're in charge of an organization or a sports program, if you see that type of thing start happening on your team or business, if you see you know, someone getting picked on or something like that, you know, I would probably move to, you know, speak with that person, see their level of, you know, being comfortable, and then, you know, I would probably approach it as an organizational stance. You know, obviously we have a lot of policies in place now that protect us, you know, and give us rights and stuff like that. But I think it's the culture. So we have to really pay attention to the culture that we build on our teams and within our business and organizations. So I think that is probably the most important thing. And again, I am for normalizing and moving forward, just like Dania is on the topic.
If you have a question, you can unmute yourself and just fire away. Will, are you back with us?
I should be. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Not hearing any questions from the audience. And folks, if you would be more comfortable just using the chat feature to shoot that to me, I will relate that. You should see a chat icon at the bottom of your screen when you roll your cursor. So Will, I just want to circle around and Rich, very quickly ask you to talk about how people in the audience can learn more about the issue in general and about your organization in particular.
Sure. And first of all, just apologizing to everyone. Our heat and lights went out for a second as well. So we think the snow caused a momentary blackout. We're back in business, and I think this is the world we live in these days. But thank you for your patience, and thanks to my panelists for covering for me while I was out. I was just saying that I would encourage everyone to seek out stories in the arts and media created by LGBTQ+ creators in terms of continuing this conversation and learning more just about stories that we hear as often in mainstream media. And then as far as SCE's work, you can learn more about us at scefdn.org. And our current funding opportunity is called the Million Coaches Challenge. We are aiming to fund a cohort of organizations to bring youth development training to 1 million coaches across the country. And you can learn more about that initiative both on our website and on millioncoaches.org.
There is another question in there.
I'm sorry, I don't see it. If you could, do you see it? If you do, you can go ahead and ask it and take at it.
So the question is, how does DEI impact the business of sports? And I'm sorry, I don't know the abbreviation DEI.
Yeah, I can take a stab at answering this again from my perspective. DEI being diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
I think one way I might answer this strictly from a business case perspective, and I think there's more and more research showing this, that, you know, besides the tokenization of having different, you know, people in a room who hold different identities, we know that there is an actual impact on the bottom line. So I think, again, I'll highlight a women's sports example. When money is invested, for instance, in televising women's games and selling jerseys and apparels, we actually see people watch and people buy those items, right? And when you have people on the sport marketing side who represent diverse identities and backgrounds, you can more effectively engage with broader audiences. I think I read a study about something like almost half of all of the new millennial sports enthusiasts were female identifying. There's such a big potential market here to engage folks, not just participating in sports, but also in consuming sports. And we're missing such a key market and such a key audience when we maintain a really narrow and traditional focus. So everything from on the back end side to the folks in marketing business to the folks playing sports, the more that we're representing different backgrounds and identities, the more that we're actually growing the industry from all perspectives, from an inclusion perspective, from a bottom line business case perspective, from an audience and viewership perspective. Yeah.
Ashley, Will, you want to take a shot at that?
Sure, I can add to that. I think I would also look at the more like extreme cases of DEI not being done effectively, and for, you know, lack of a better word, businesses, teams, individual athletes being canceled for being homophobic or being racist or being sexist, etc. I think that Danya, you make a great point about the bottom line of, you know, the business case for DEI in a more like positive and forward-looking perspective. But I think it's also important to note that when, you know, we are increasingly and I think encouragingly living in a society that does not tolerate racism, homophobia, and sexism as much as we are encouraged by authentic representation of groups that have historically not really enjoyed it. So I think that that is another side of the story that I would want to consider.
Okay. Other questions from the audience?
One just came in on the chat that's how can we keep up the momentum of positive social change that's occurring? And how does that relate to the role sport can play in this movement? I was just reading it. I was not volunteering to answer it right away. But if someone else wants to take a stab at it, that's a great question.
Ashley or Danya, do you want to take a crack at that?
Haley, that's quite the question. That's quite the question. Let's see, how can we keep up the momentum? I think the best way to keep up the momentum is to keep recognizing it. So that's what we need to keep. There's a lot of, you know, social movements going on right now, and, you know, keep recognizing it's what we need to do. Some of the other panelists here, you know, spoke to the fact of, you know, how many women do follow sports. Like I can just tell you that a lot of us over here in Seattle, we're about to need you know, blood pressure medication from watching the Seahawks. It's been a really hard season. And when I belong to a lot of Seahawks group, and a lot of them are women in there talking like, you know, Pete Carroll, why, Pete Carroll, why, it's just so funny to see like these, you know, the Seahawks have really brought like a great, I mean, even my mother knows football now. Okay. You know, I remember watching football before we had cool, you know, TVs, you know, whatever, the tube kind of TV. But when I was younger, I really liked the long ball. So, right, I wanted that 90-yard touchdown. Now I want to watch 4th and inches, because the intricacies of the sport, to me, you know, just the play calling and the chess match that goes on, I really do think women pay more attention to sports. We are half the market, if you want to look at it that way. If you want to miss half the market, by all means, go ahead and miss it. So I think including us, you know, women and again, all people that are marginalized into sports is important, because again, it transcends. Sports is something that no matter what, you know, they can make someone's day better, you know, mine included. I'll watch everything. I'll watch golf, I'll watch bowling, you know, I'll watch fighting, I'll watch all of it, you know, and if I've had all girl parties get together, well, we will watch a fight, you know, and it's really not just the guys, but the thing is, I think that a lot of people in the sports industry don't realize how much we actually do pay attention. And, you know, I'll watch the finals for Major League Baseball. I'll watch the finals for everything. I'll watch international competition. Again, I love the women's national soccer team. I think that they, you know, in my opinion, they are the best team representing the United States right now. You know, that championship we were in England, we had the most viewership, I think, globally or United States of any sporting event ever. We broke records, yet again, still fighting for pay equality and everything else that we're fighting for right now. And just to continue the fight and to recognize us as athletes and to recognize us as part of the market.
Yeah, and I'll chime in too. This is such a big question. I wish any of us had the answer to this, but I'll say sport is playing a large role in the movement already. Again, I've talked about the WNBA like 10 times on this call. If you don't watch, you totally should. The WNBA, for instance, dedicated their 2020 season, which was over the summer, to Breonna Taylor and the Say Her Name movement. A lot, and if you look, like NBA did a lot of similar things, postponing games. When people, I think a lot of this is continue to think about sports as political. Sports is inherently political, right? So just continue to support that, right? Again, bringing it back to how many of us engage in sports either as athletes or as watching, or again, if you think about all the young people, back to Will's really great. I think I wrote this down. Is it 32 million young people who play sports? Whatever it was, a large amount. These athletes and are role models that young people are watching growing up. So the more political that they are, the better. The more that we're creating spaces for athletes to actually be role models and at the forefront of social justice work, I think is really critical. So continue to support that and to drive that. 32.5 million in 2019. That's huge.
Yeah, and thanks for such great answers. I was thinking a lot about my own response as I was kind of digesting what you were saying. I think one, it's important to talk about, like, I think when we all refer to the movement, it's a broader movement than just LGBTQ representation in sports. It is this larger movement towards positive social change and a more just society. And I agree that sport can play a huge role because of the platform that professional athletes have, the amount of people who participate in sports in a non-professional way, and kind of like the love that our country has for its athletes, I think leads us to listen to athletes in a way that many people don't give the same kind of respect or time to people that don't have the same status. And, you know, there's a lot of money in it. And I think that that is an important piece of the puzzle that we can't ignore, is that when, you know, when the WNBA dedicates an entire season to Breonna Taylor, when a sporting association that depends on Black athletes, like the NBA or the NFL, when those athletes take a stand, you know, the money, it sends a strong message to business leaders and the industry writ large. So I think it's an important piece of the puzzle. But, you know, I think when, in terms of keeping this conversation going and keeping the momentum going, we, you know, in the past 5 years, we've seen Serena Williams get criticized for wearing a catsuit instead of a white outfit at Wimbledon. We've seen Colin Kaepernick kneel during the national anthem, and people take really, really impassioned sides on this debate without really digging into why he was doing it. And we've seen, you know, this huge international conversation around athletes like Caster Semenya, where they're, you know, who is intersex to a degree, and they are just in the middle of this firestorm of where should this athlete participate in sports. So as we look at these conversations, we're going to see people simultaneously say that athletes have this huge platform and then criticize them for using it. And when those critiques happen, I would encourage us to all dig a little bit deeper and go, hey, why does it make you so mad that this athlete is using their position to advocate for change? What bothers you about that? And let's like really dig into the root of it, because we can't ask our athletes to take you know, we give these athletes this huge platform. We don't want them to just use it to play the game. Like, they are going to use it for whatever they want. And it is a huge opportunity that we can't ignore to keep this movement going forward.
So we got a question from Stan that I think, Ashley, I want you to answer first, because you're probably best positioned to answer it. But the other panelists should also chime in. And by the way, Ashley, I feel your heartbreak. I watched the Cardinals Seahawks game last night, and as a football coach, I'm questioning some of Pete Carroll's calls too. But Stan wants to know, can women's professional football make it in the same way that the women's NBA has?
So this is my university professor. Thank you for throwing this in the chat here. This is actually my entire project right now, probably for the duration of 3 quarters at the University of Washington, which I'm dedicating to the study of women's tackle football right now. So that is a question that I am trying to answer, which we have talked about several things inside this panel today about it. So the difference is that the WNBA has the backing of the NBA. So it's kind of like, you know, a brother and sisterhood between the two. You know, women's football, we do not have the backing of the NFL. And I know this is a public forum, and I'm going to go out on a limb and just say it right now. The NFL is very protective of their NFL and their little crest. It's the, you know, largest making money, you know, sporting, you know, the business we have in the United States is professional men's football. So they won't lend us their little crest, little trademark. We can't get the WNFL. So it's going to be rather hard, and we're going to have to create a workaround, which is, you know, what I'm trying to identify right now is, can we do this? And one of the things we need is the support of, well, if I can have just half of the population, just the women in the United States support me, I think I'm good. So I think it's possible. I think we can do it. It's going to take, you know, what they say, breaking barriers, finding that glass ceiling and smashing it. It's what I got to do. So when I find my mission and I get on it, I keep going. So yeah, I appreciate that question. I hope we can get there someday. I know it's not going to be in my playing days. I want to see it in my lifetime. I know the WNBA went, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, professional in 1996. They've been professional for a lot longer than we have. I actually have an original set of, you know, WNBA basketball cards. I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not sure when women's soccer went professional, if anybody knows that, you know, question, and if they have this, the backing of the men's professional side. So I definitely think it's a brother sisterhood, and we do need help getting there. I would love to see women's football on ESPN. It's a great, you know, sport. Just to watch it. If you're missing out, I'd highly suggest you check us out.
Will, Danya, do you want to chime in there on that one?
Yeah, I, again, can't speak. Ashley is the athlete here. Ashley is the one actively working to make this happen. But again, I'm going to be the dollars and cents guy and say that business has to step it up. I think what you need to create a truly like nationwide sports movement around a sport is you need the talent and you need the investment to make it the spectacle that millions of people will tune into. The talent is there in women's sports. We know that. And I think that it is now on, you know, kind of the industry around it and the, you know, the business community, the movers and shakers on the money side to really invest resources into building that up, because the talent is there and the market is there. It's the money that's missing.
Terrific. So we are hard up against our time here. I want to thank Danya and Ashley and Will for their time and their contributions and their expertise, and thank each of you for joining in as they've talked about this pressing issue, both at the professional level all the way down to youth development level. So thank both of you very much. There is a main panel discussion at 2 o'clock that I invite you all to take part in. Thanks so much, and have a great day.